Because I'm talking about the Oscars today, I thought I might dress up a little bit fancier than I usually do, but it is very weird to just be sitting in my bedroom. I feel like this is the case for every movie lover, but the Oscars is one of those things where I love it, but I also get disappointed by it every single year. I recently did a video on my top 10 favorite films from last year, and only 2 of those films have been nominated for Best Picture in this year's Oscars, which is the list of nominations I'm going to be talking about today. So as you can gather from that, my taste in films is often quite different from what gets nominated for the Oscars or what even gets made onto top 10 lists from a variety of different film publications. This year I'm actually quite impressed with the list of Best Picture films. I think they're all really well made films. I think they're all mostly really enjoyable. Most of them also have a lot of flaws for me that stop them being in my personal top 10, but it is really nice to see such a huge variety of films on the list that don't all fall into the usual Oscar bait category. So today I'm going to do a ranking of the 10 films that have been nominated for Best Picture in this year's Oscars. Starting at number 10 is Dune. This is an interesting film in that it was marketed as a blockbuster, but actually watching it is nothing like your usual blockbuster type of film. It's a sci-fi film, it's got an amazing cast, it's based on a very famous sci-fi book that famously has previously been impossible to adapt into a film according to people who love the book. I didn't know the story very well and haven't seen any of the other adaptations, so I went in very blind, but personally for me, I found it so slow. I know there's a second film in the works, and this definitely just felt like the first half of the story. Only if they just hurried up some of the action, they probably could have fitted it all into one film. The fact that I found it so slow annoyed me more than anything because I thought it had so much potential. I was really interested in the characters, really interested in the world. These alien planets and people and the system were so beautifully realized by the whole production team. But it just felt like nothing was happening for long stretches of time. Not just that the plot wasn't progressing, but the characters weren't progressing either. A lot of the film felt taken up with dreams that Timothée Chalamet's character has about Zendaya. She as a proper character doesn't even turn up until the last half hour, I think it is. I just found it interminable sitting in the cinema and felt exhausted by the end, and then just felt even more exhausted thinking about the fact that I'll have to watch another film to find out what actually happens in the end. And number 9 is Licorice Pizza. This is Paul Thomas Anderson's latest film about 2 young people in the 70s in LA. One of the weird things about this film is that it stars Alana Haim from the band Haim, and her name is Alana, and it also features her sisters and her parents, who also go by their real names. That threw me off right from the start. I didn't understand why he didn't give her a character name. It's like he wrote some fan fiction about the band Haim if they were living in the 70s, and all the other actors have character names, so I found that just a bit weird. But anyway, Alana plays a woman who says she's about 25, and she forms a sort of strange, slightly romantic, slightly antagonistic relationship with a 15-year-old boy who's played by Cooper Hoffman, who is Philip Seymour Hoffman's son. I find that a weird and uncomfortable age gap, and for a while the film feels like it's kind of dissecting the fact that there's this grown woman who is struggling to become an adult and finds herself drawn to this guy who is younger than her, perhaps as a sign of her immaturity. But then the film goes full-blown romance towards the end and really wants you to root for these characters to be together, and I just wasn't feeling that. I didn't want them to be together because it is a weird age gap. That, as well as a scene where this man does a really racist Japanese accent, which obviously we're meant to be criticizing the man doing this, but I'm not sure that's really clearly presented enough because it was getting a lot of laughs in the cinema and I just found it extremely uncomfortable. The film itself doesn't have much of a plot. It is kind of different scenes and scenarios of these characters interacting with the world as it was in LA in the 70s. It talks about real things that happened at the time, like a fuel shortage. I think it could have been a really fascinating film, but I think for me, the tone of it was too stepped back. It was too observational. I kind of wanted it to interrogate more of what was going on, and it almost felt like the film wasn't taking responsibility for some of the themes that it was really bringing up. Again, like all these films, it was visually stunning. The production value's so good. All the costumes amazing. I wanted to wear everything that Alana Haim wears. At number 8, I have Nightmare Alley. This is Guillermo del Toro's latest film. It's an adaptation of a novel that was also made into a film in the 40s, and he really retains that 40s noir feel. It's about a man played by Bradley Cooper who joins a circus and sort of tells his story of how he allows greed and power to kind of corrupt him over time. This is again so visually beautiful. The acting is all pretty great, but it was the story that really let it down for me. I just found the characters to be very surface level. I didn't feel like it was telling me anything new about human behavior. I felt like these characters were people I'd all seen before. They all kind of fell into stereotypes and didn't really do anything new with them. I wasn't really sure what the film was trying to tell us, except for maybe don't value success and power over everything else in your life. At number 7, I have Drive My Car, directed by Raisuke Hamaguchi. This is a Japanese film based on a Murakami short story and has really expanded out that short story into a very long 3-hour film. And that was my biggest issue with this film. It was just too long. It didn't warrant its screen time in any way. And again, it just made me frustrated because there are so many scenes and actors and characters in this film that is so interesting. It's hard to tell the actual plot without giving away quite a major twist that happens in the first sort of section of the story, but the main bulk of the story is an actor and director putting on the Chekhov play Uncle Vanya, and he is renowned for directing plays with actors talking in their native language, regardless of what that is. He also gets driven to and from his accommodation in the theatre in his own car, and he is given a driver, and they sort of strike up this interesting relationship. A lot of the film is really long conversations in single locations, and it's pretty incredible how the film makes those so interesting and engaging. You do genuinely kind of feel like you're watching a play in that respect. The process of him putting on the play as well was really interesting. So like I say, there's just so many aspects of it that were so good, but it just went on too long. I felt like it made its point way before the end credits came up, and it made me annoyed because I'd felt a very emotional connection to the characters, but that just all went away because of the frustration I felt at the unnecessary length and it just repeating itself and going on and on. It's a very slow film. The way the characters act is kind of stilted. Maybe I'm just someone with a short attention span and I'm not able to appreciate the beauty of a 3-hour film, but I do honestly think that if you can't tell your story in a reasonable amount of time, then you're not trying hard enough, to be honest. Next is probably the most controversial film on this list, and even more controversial probably that I put it at number 6 on my list, is Don't Look Up. This is Adam McKay's film that came out on Netflix over Christmas time. The one about the asteroid hurtling to Earth and the two scientists played by Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence trying to tell the world that it's happening and no one believing them. And it's a very clear metaphor for climate change. I did not hate this film. I didn't find it funny in any way. It mostly just made me extremely anxious because I feel anxious about climate change all the time anyway, and I try and just stamp it down because it would just be impossible for me to go about my day-to-day life feeling as anxious as I do about climate change. So this film just brought all those emotions back up to the surface, and I just really felt their frustration about no one listening to them because I feel that way as well. It does feel like no one's really taking it seriously, and I thought it was really well done in that respect, and I kind of do hope that it might have got the message across to people who weren't thinking that way before. There were so many critics that came out and said, oh yes, well, we appreciate the message, but it was just telling it in the wrong way. And I just found that so funny because that's exactly what the film was saying. There's a whole aspect to the film about the media and how they embrace Leonardo DiCaprio as this dorky science guy who's nicely telling them about the situation, and they completely disregard Jennifer Lawrence because she's seen as shrieking and negative, and there's this sense of having to package the news nicely all the time so that people will not turn off. So I found the whole discourse around this film very ironic, as if these journalists had not actually watched the film. I was very surprised to see it nominated, to be honest. I certainly did put it in my top 10 of the year, but it's definitely been a really interesting, divisive film. At number 5, I have West Side Story. This is certainly not the musical that I would have nominated. I think many better musicals came out last year, particularly In the Heights. performance, but obviously I can understand why West Side Story was the one that did get nominated. I was sadly disappointed with this one when I saw it. I think I was just expecting something really big and bold and fun like In the Heights, forgetting of course the content of the musical and the story of the musical is not exactly fun. But the thing that surprised me the most is that it weirdly felt like a very insular film. Everything felt so clearly like it was a set. It felt really small, the cast felt really small, and maybe that's just my expectation of the musical being incorrect. Maybe that is the kind of musical that it is. But there were other issues I had with it, particularly Ansel Elgort's acting and his singing. I would understand if he was not that great a singer, but they hired him because they thought he was right for the part and had the right charisma to make you believe that Maria was going to instantly fall in love with him, but I don't think he had that either, so I'm really confused why he was cast in the first place, to be honest. And Rachel Zegler as Maria has the most angelic voice. So when the two of them did duets, it was just so obvious that he was not great. The supporting cast was by far the best part of the film, especially for me, Mike Feist as Riff. I'd not seen this actor before, but looking him up, he's relatively well known amongst the musical theatre community as someone who was one of the original characters in Dear Evan Hansen on Broadway. But he was so talented, and he's so different in the film than he is in real life. He is such a good actor, such a good dancer, and a great singer as well. I very much look forward to seeing him in many things. I really hope he gets cast in everything. And of course the music's always going to be great. The choreography and the dance numbers are always amazing to watch. So it's not a bad film by any stretch, but it just didn't blow me away like I was expecting it to, I think. At number 4 I have Belfast. This is an interesting one where it is critically getting a fair bit of criticism, but in terms of public reaction to it, I think it's doing pretty well. I know my grandparents went and saw it and they absolutely loved it. I definitely enjoyed it quite a lot, apart from the beginning, which was this very strange like drone shots over Belfast as it is now that just very much looked like a tourism video. But once the film starts for real, I found it quite enjoyable. It very much is a personal story for Kenneth Branagh, the director. He really is just putting what he remembers of being a child at that time on the screen and telling his family story really about what it was like to be a family during that time who decided to remove themselves from the situation because they could. I think the weirdest part for me was how nostalgic I was feeling about it. Kenneth Branagh is the same age as my mum and just made me realize how much my parents gave me their own childhood. There's a bit where he goes to the cinema with his family to watch Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. At Christmas time he gets Thunderbirds toys. And those were the things that I grew up watching as a kid as well. That was kind of a bit of a weird experience, I have to say. I can definitely understand a lot of the criticisms people have for it, but I personally think it really succeeds at what it set out to do. And number 3 I have Coda. This is another film which I'm kind of surprised that it's getting so many awards. I watched this ages ago when it first came out on Apple TV Plus and thought it was a really sweet story, but kind of was very stuck in between two tones. So it's about a girl who is the only hearing person in her family. Her brother and her parents are deaf, and so she's the one who has to translate for them all the time. She, meanwhile, at school is discovering that she ironically loves to sing, and so you have the juxtaposition of her feeling like she needs to stay with her family and continue to look out for them while also wanting to leave and follow her passion of singing. I felt the film really wanted to be like a sweet YA coming of age story while at the same time be like a gritty realistic drama, and those two sort of genres could quite easily mesh together, I feel, but certain scenes often felt like they just were worlds apart in their tone and didn't quite mesh together. That being said, I thought all the performances were amazing, and the story was a really interesting insight into the deaf community and what it is like to be a coda, which is the name for someone who is the interpreter for their deaf family. So not a bad film by any stretch, but an interesting one to be nominated because it didn't feel particularly Oscar baity when I watched it. As I say, most of these films weren't on my top 10 list, so the fact that Coda is quite high is simply because I really enjoyed it as a film compared to most of the others where I had more issues with them than I had with this film. So the top 2 were actually on my top 10 list, so they obviously had to be at the top 2 of this list. Number 2 is King Richard, which is the film with Will Smith where he plays the father of Serena and Venus Williams. I've already given my review of that in my other video, but basically I thought it was a really funny film and a really interesting film about a family that I actually didn't know the background of, even though I've known about the two sisters for my whole life because obviously they are world famous tennis players. I'm certainly not not surprised that this one is up for Oscars, but I really haven't heard as much about this film as the others, which is interesting because I feel like this one, being a biopic and having an actor like Will Smith as the star, feels like it should be right up the Oscars alley in terms of the type of film that it is. So at number 1, and the film that I am personally rooting for at the Oscars, is The Power of the Dog. This film has 12 nominations, including a nomination for 4 of its actors in each of the acting categories, which I think is pretty impressive. This one has been winning a lot of the other awards, which apparently give an indication of what will win at the Oscars. So also hoping that Jane Campion might take away the Best Directing Award as well. Again, my review of this is in my other video, but this one is a fascinating western, a very slow burn western about this man played by Benedict Cumberbatch, who is just horrible to the people around him, and it just goes through the effects that he has on his brother, his brother's wife, and her son. Out of all the films on this list, this one felt the least Oscar baity in that I don't think Jane Campion would be remotely thinking about awards anytime she goes to create something, which is why I'm really happy that it's doing so well, because it feels like it's genuinely just rewarding a good film. It's a really artistic and beautifully done film, and so I really hope it just sweeps away with everything. Let me know if you'll be watching the Oscars and which film you'll be rooting for. Because of the time zone differences, the Oscars show at around 7 a.m. in the morning, I think it is here. I've taken the day off as annual leave so I can watch them. Because it's that early, I probably won't be dressing up, but I will be planning a nice breakfast, I think. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!